The New York Daily News defending this cartoon it published of New York City mayoral candidate Andrew Yang, which Yang calls a racialized caricature. The Daily News writes, quote, Yang is a leading contender to be mayor. And as commentators, his opponents in the news editorial board have pointed out, he's recently revealed there are major gaps in his knowledge of New York City politics and policy, nor has he ever voted in a mayoral election. Bill Bramwell's cartoon is a comment on that, period, end of story. Joining me now is mayoral candidate Andrew Yang. Nice to see you, Andrew. What do you say to the Daily News?
I think anyone objective looking at that cartoon knows that it's playing on an idea of Asian Americans as permanent tourists and outsiders. And we're at a point in our history, unfortunately, when Asian Americans are getting beaten on the streets of New York and told to go back where we came from or that we don't belong. So the Daily News characterizing it as simply a political commentary that does not include race just rings false.
It followed you responding to a question about what your favorite subway station was. You had said the Times Square station, so it shows you coming out of the Times Square station. You don't think there's any legitimate way to depict that?
Again, the cartoon does not work if it's a person of a different race. And I said Times Square is my favorite subway stop because I live blocks away in Hell's Kitchen and use that subway stop to get around the city. It actually goes just about anywhere in the city because there's so many lines that converge there.
It is very convenient. You talked about anti-Asian hate crime. The president did sign a bill on that recently. Have you seen any change in the last week or so?
I am thrilled that Joe signed that bill that was championed by New York's own Grace Meng, who's co-chair of my campaign. And the fact that we're taking this seriously as a country gives me a lot of pride and hope. But when you talk to Asian Americans here in New York City and around the country, there's still a sense of anxiety and concern. And it's based upon the interactions that people are having when folks shrink away or glare, or in some cases, do even worse.
What's going to change it?
Well, the hope is that we can start bringing people together and send a clear message that everyone belongs, everyone is American, that the coronavirus is certainly not associated with anyone of a particular ethnic group. And the country is still recovering from the pandemic, in my mind, psychologically and emotionally. Like there's just a lot of pain, a lot of struggle, a lot of suffering. And unfortunately, that's manifesting in violence against particular groups.
It's also just manifesting itself in violence. I mean, we see the mass shooting in San Jose. We know that violence in New York City and crime in New York City is up as well. So as mayor, what are you going to do about that?
Well, there are a number of things we have to do as quickly as possible, John. And so you have to track down the folks who are perpetrating these shootings and get the clearance rate up. Because right now, if you dig into the numbers, the clearance rate or the rate at which we're solving some of these shootings is way too low. It's 20-25% in some parts of New York City, which means if you shoot someone, there's a good chance that you're going to be on the loose and may shoot another person. So that's job one. We have to provide more resources to people who are coming out of prison because sometimes they will give rise to some kind of payback or another violent act. So there are things that we can do immediately to get crime going down in New York. But you're right that this is a national phenomenon, that there's a lot of pain and a lot of pent-up energy, and it's expressing itself in violence in many places.
What about funding for the police force in general?
I think defunding the police is the wrong approach here in New York City. What we have to do is take the resources we have and make sure that we're actually utilizing them and deploying them effectively. Back to this issue on shootings, often there'll only be one detective assigned to that case. And so while they're investigating, another shooting will occur, and then they'll be assigned to that case, and then the first shooting will fall by the wayside. We need to have multiple detectives assigned and then have the gun suppression unit have the resources it needs to support the precincts, because right now some of the more violent precincts are left on their own.
In New York City, in the Democratic primary, there's going to be ranked choice voting for the first time, which means that people rank their candidates in order of preference, and then the person on the bottom keeps getting taken away until one person basically gets over 50%. This has got to change the way that you campaign as a politician, because you're saying to voters, don't just vote for me as your top choice, but I also want to be your second or third choice if I'm not your top choice just as well. I mean, how does it affect your approach to people?
First, let me say I love ranked choice voting, and I hope it's the future of democracy, not just in New York City, but around the country. It can free us from this polarization. And John, to your point, it should make it so that candidates campaign more positively, try and bring people together, because if you just snipe at each other, then someone else who's positive will tend to rise and do better. It's one reason I've tried to campaign very optimistically, but ranked choice voting should be our future around the country because it can help free us up from this one side against the other dynamic.
How do you make the case that you know as much about New York City politics and government and the way the city works, having never voted in a mayoral race, if I'm correct, as the other people who are running against you?
I'm a public school parent. I know what families are going through here in the city, but also New Yorkers know that our government has not been working for us for years. We've had systems failing right and left, trash is piling up. The municipal budget's gone from 60 billion to 90 billion over the last 10 years, and I cannot find a single New Yorker who thinks that the city or its services have gotten 50% better during that time. We need new leadership in the city. New Yorkers know it, and that's why we're going to win this race on June 22nd.
Andrew Yang, nice to see you again. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Great to see you.
Put the money in our hands. 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 Can we afford it? Yes. Will it cause inflation? No. Is it awesome? Yes. Is anyone trying to make it happen? Yeah, that guy.